students of philosophy have always the highest scores in the GRE, which is the Graduate Records Examination. The composite scores is always #1 in philosophy. They have the highest LSAT scores and so forth. And why is that? It's because in philosophy what you learn is to be a very careful, innovative, and critical thinker. You learn how to reason. You learn how to evaluate arguments. You learn how to be a little bit dispassionate about your arguments. Not that you don't care about them, but you don't think if somebody disagrees with you, they attack you personally. No, they just attack a certain kind of theory that you have. And when you think about the beliefs you had in your past, lots of them turned out to be, on close inspection, pretty bad or not as good as you thought they were. And it's a good idea to have somebody challenge you with reason. Not saying, oh, your idea is bad because you're an idiot. That would be a personal attack. But rather, your idea is bad because it doesn't have any good argumentative support. There's other alternative explanations for your evidence, and so on and so forth. And this is what we do in philosophy from day one. Okay, so you get into a philosophy course, Introduction to Philosophy, and you learn about questions and topics that seem very abstract, removed from real life. But one of the purposes to think about these things is to learn and acquire the skill of being responsive to arguments, of being sensitive to problems that you might have with the view you're trying to defend, and not to think that if somebody attacks you, they're attacking you. No, they're rather attacking a certain kind of view. So philosophy, I often tell my students, is a contact sport. So we actually get into fights, but it's not really hurting anybody, it's hurting maybe your view. And then if you mature through this process, you will become a person that then is able to say, okay, I've had this view in the past, now I've gotten new evidence, now I've gotten a challenge, and then notice this view is not really tenable, so, but I want to be rational, I want to have good views, so I'm going to change it now. Okay, so you start to not dig in all the time, to not just say, this is what I believe and I'm going to keep to it just because I believe it, but rather you say, this is what I believe because I have these kinds of reasons, because it makes sense of these kinds of experiences, and so forth. What's important, therefore, when you do philosophy is that you don't think that philosophy courses are going to teach you about what other philosophers thought. It's not a list of quotes from philosophers, okay? It's rather an engagement with the ideas, but not in order to memorize them, but rather to critically acquire them and possibly modify them in light of new evidence, in light of reasons and challenges that others give you. That also means, of course, that in philosophy, we typically do not use textbooks that you might be familiar with from high school. You know, where you have a little text box that gives you a take-home message, and then you memorize that, and on the exam you give it back. Rather, in philosophy, you're exposed from the day one to source material, to original research, which is very difficult, which makes philosophy also very frustrating for the beginner, but it's very important that you are able to acquire the skill to analyze different sources of information and pool them together. I often tell my students that learning in college only from textbooks is a bad idea as a preparation for a career in which you're going to have a leadership position. Leadership positions, jobs don't come with textbooks. You gotta be able to go out there and find the information, synthesize it, and then communicate it in an effective way to your team. And that's one of the things you learn in philosophy, as I said, from the get-go. It's no longer kindergarten. We no longer give you a text box that you have to memorize and then you give it back to us. Who cares? We know you can read. You have your high school degree. Now you go on to actually start thinking and become a mature person. In the fall of 2016, we have a broad offering of different kinds of philosophy courses. We have our standard introductory courses, one of which deals with puzzles and paradoxes, such as the liar paradox. Suppose I say right now, I am lying. Is that true or false? Well, if it were true, then when I say I'm lying, what I'm saying is false. But then if it's false, then it's true that I'm like, that's one of those puzzles. And then we also have a course in the philosophy of religion, taught by my colleague Susanna Gooden, where she's going to talk about issues such as the existence of God. If God exists, what kind of being would God be? What sort of ethical imperatives can be derived from that, if any, and so on. Then I'm going to be teaching a course in the philosophy of science, where we talk about the notion of evidence, the notion of experiments, the notion of theory change, and see how these kind of problems arise within the empirical sciences themselves. My colleague Harvey Hicks is teaching a course on existentialism and phenomenology. Existentialism is a part of philosophy that deals with the meaning of life. So if you have ever seen Monty Python's movie about this, this is what you want to do when you take a philosophy course. My colleague Ed Sherline is teaching a course on global justice, which is really an important discussion that we should have concerning the effects of actions in one country on the rest of the planet and the rest of the people in other countries, because we live in a globalized world. So justice is not anymore simply a question about how can we have a just society here in the United States, but what sort of effects do our decisions have on other countries as well. And then we also have some graduate seminars. One is on philosophy of writing, taught by Jeff Lockwood, which is modeled after this idea of science writing, spearheaded by people like Stephen Hawking and Brian Greene, where eminent physicists are really able to translate abstract physical theories for the general public. Philosophers have failed to do this so far. We want to step in here, step up here, and fill in the gap by training our graduate students and also advanced undergraduates to write about philosophy in a way that's publicly accessible, because it's too important to be left at the university and in specialized journals. Myself, I'm teaching also a graduate seminar on the history of analytic philosophy, which is, roughly speaking, the attempt to use the methods of modern logic and mathematics to approach different and traditional problems in philosophy. And finally, we're going to have a course in ethical theory taught by my colleague Ed Sherline. These are the kinds of questions I can do when doing philosophy, and it's such a broad spectrum that I sometimes really think that there should be more than 24 hours in a day, because there's so much to think about.